Hello guys, welcome back to the channel, and in this video I want to talk to you about one of those subjects that's often sort of argued about really, and that is cohabiting snakes. So although our snakes aren't in the wild, and it's wrong to say we keep them like this because that's what they do in the wild, that's actually not always a correct statement whatsoever. They're not in the wild, and for many of us they're not even wild caught. They're captive bred and produced, and often we replicate the wild for our animals' best interests, but other aspects of that are just not compatible. They may have a certain weather range in the wild. That doesn't mean that's all good for them. They have certain predators in the wild. Yeah, we don't really want to introduce those into their enclosures. They have to deal with dangerous food sometimes in the wild, risk injury and scarring and even death from their food, whether that's too big a meal to digest or attack and injury, fighting their food. They have parasite loads in the wild which are perfectly healthy, which you wouldn't want in captivity because they probably wouldn't stay perfectly healthy, balanced, and so on and so forth. But what do they do in the wild? Do snakes cohab? Well, if you watch any of the herping channels like NFK Herping, or you go herping yourself in your state, country, wherever you're from, you will know for sure many species cohab for big chunks of the year in the wild. If you're from North America or Europe, an awful lot of our snakes will cohab through autumn, winter brumation and springtime. And many of those may then disperse more once the breeding season's over, foraging alone to different areas before coming back together and hanging out around their hibernaculum areas, again in large numbers. And if you do go herping and you lift up tin or rubbish or rocks or wood or whatever, you'll also notice not only will you often find multiple snakes of the same species of many different sizes, you'll often find them cohabiting with other snakes and other reptiles. Here in the UK, in suitable habitat, if you were to lift up a bit of corrugated tin, you may well find our grass snakes, adder, slowworm, all under the same area, cheek by jowl, even though technically the adder might well be able to eat some of the slowworms under there. So they definitely cohab in the wild to a greater or larger degree. Does that mean you should cohab them in captivity? No, I don't think snakes pine of loneliness if they're not kept together or they don't meet their own species. Certainly males in the breeding season that are mature may well spend plenty of time cruising around their enclosure, going off their food, hunting for a mate. But to be honest, they'll spend a lot of time doing that, some of them, even if they've got a mate, because at the end of the day, they don't just want one woman, they want several, and that they're just driven to find as many as they can. So no, they don't need to be cohabbed. Can you cohabitat these animals? Many species, yes you can, absolutely. But there are rules to follow for the safety and the health of that individual animal. Do they enjoy it? Probably not. I don't know. Do snakes have enjoyment? I don't know. But for sure, in some cases, they're indifferent to each other when cohab. And in many cases, you get to see interesting behaviour, interactions, and you'll be surprised. Give away all the different aspects of their enclosure, heat, humidity, hot spots, cold spots. You'll be surprised how often some snakes will spend with their cohab partner. So I've cohabbed many different snakes over many years. Not all my snakes, but some of them. Sometimes I try it, sometimes I stop, sometimes I try it and they're together forever. Sometimes I'll cohab them but maybe remove the male or the female even, if it's a breeding snake and it's time to lay their eggs, mostly for disturbing her by the male, or in case I'm worried he might eat the eggs when they're being laid. But you certainly can. There are rules to follow. Would I keep different species of snake cohabbed? I don't. You're entering another level. Yes, you absolutely can, but I don't. I have done. I've kept and things that rules that people might make up in their head because of the wild. So here's an example of the wild versus captivity. Wild snakes that eat other snakes is a big part of their diet. Generally, wild snakes are always hungry, and they're often a lot leaner than our captive animals because they have to work so much harder to find food, and food can be much harder to find. In captivity, they move a couple of feet and the food drops down dead in front of them, more often than they'll ever get in the wild, I think. So I've cohabbed Mexican black king snake, adult male, with an adult male corn snake. I'd say the corn snake was slightly larger, and if you're going to go down that route, of course, snake-eating snakes, you're taking on a much more bigger risk, even with the same kind, if one individual is substantially smaller than the other, for sure. But there's always a risk of a snake eating a snake cohabbed, even if it's not a snake eater. But we'll talk about some sort of, I don't know if you say rules, but some of the things I've learned. Enjoy the rest of the video. So, big pair of yellowtail crebos. The males are way over 7 foot, probably touching 8 feet long. Females, a little bit smaller, but not a lot. Cohabbed for a long time now. Feeding's fine. You occasionally get like test bites. If you're not careful, they get scent on them, so you've got to be careful with this feeding them in enclosures. You've got to be there for many of these snakes to referee and keep an eye and be sensible about how you feed them. Some more than others. Yellowtail crebos, more than capable of eating other yellowtail crebos. These guys, no problem at all. Spend a lot of time together, a lot of time snuggled up together. The male's there right now, and the female's here. I cycle them for breeding in various ways. Last year, all infertile eggs. The year before, fantastic clutch and produced some amazing babies. With these, I shall probably separate them when I feel she's going to lay. I'm not sure whether he would eat the eggs as she's laying them, because they would, I think, eat eggs quite happily. Different ways of going about that. Obviously, removing one of them is the best option. It's a big pair of bull snakes. The male's just over 7 feet long, and the female's quite a bit smaller. Obviously, not a species known for eating other snakes. In the warmer weather, they've just come out of brumation. They're warming up gradually, not rushing them. A few days of increasing temperatures. These guys never had a problem at all cohabbing, and I just scatter feed and make sure they're in opposite parts of the enclosure, and put plenty of small food items, mice and chicks and that kind of thing, or a very small, well, a medium rat for him and a small rat for her. Never had any problem with those two whatsoever. What I do tend to do is remove her when she's gravid and getting towards pre-lay, because she's going to want to search out a nesting area and probably isn't going to want him wedging in there with her as well. But bull snakes, absolutely no problem whatsoever about cohabbing in really any way, shape or form. He will still go through his sort of spring, early summer breeding cycle of searching out a mate, but certainly less problematic with that. Bull snakes really can cruise them down the front an awful lot to try and get out and look for mates. Quite well known for it. With a female in there, doesn't do it so much, that is for sure. Is he a sex pest? Yeah, it's not too bad at all. She just gets out of the way of him. Big female false water cobra. Again, 7 feet long, very chunky. The male is actually, there he is, look. He's a smaller, females get much bigger than males. He's not a lot less in length. They're just way less in the sort of girth department. She could definitely eat him if she really pushed herself. False water cobras, big snake eaters in the wild, eat anything. Barry Summerhays actually told me he lost a lavender male eaten by a female. Now, of course, you could pair these when the females are much bigger than, say, a younger male. And obviously there's a possibility. These two are cohabbed loads. The trouble with these is they actually breed like rabbits once they get going. They'll produce 2 clutches a year at least. The males are real sex pests. They are really are for much of the year, and they really sort of give their females a lot of unwanted attention. So if I don't want them to breed, or I only want one clutch, or I don't want her being pestered, then they are kept separate. The way these are cohabbed, like some of my snakes, is I don't think you can see there. Wish you can. There's a hole cut in there, and they've got access to one big viv made up of their 2 vivs, one on top of the other. So they get to use the whole area, or they can be separated off. There's a big tile there that's covered in the substrate. to stop them pushing into each other. False water cobras, believe it or not, cohabit for big parts of the year here. But it's all about that common sense around feeding and the size of the animals. Knowing or hoping you know your animals. Vietnamese blue beauties. What a beautiful display animal. And cohabiting these has really made some differences. So I can tell you now, and I've said this in other videos, the biggest male here, he used to be a real sort of glass banger. I had to put drapes over his vivarium so he didn't see movement in a snake room. He was all striking at the glass. And I was given another one, a smaller male, by a friend who just couldn't be doing with its snappy behaviour. As he grew bigger, they were putting together with a younger female, or two younger females at the time. These guys just do not strike at the glass. They're much calmer, and that's something I'm really finding with cohab snakes. It can make snappy, defensive snakes much calmer, and I think it's because there's more movement going on all the time, each other, and they get used to seeing things move, each other move around, and they're not as suddenly surprised or defensive. At any one time in here, there's two males, and there were two females. One female way outgrew the other one. They're both sisters the same age. The smaller one's taken out now, and to give her that time to grow on and get her share of the food. Scatter feed these, but I can tell you now, in the summertime, feeding response to these things is even more so than the cooler months. These guys, I don't always, but until you sort of know how they feed, you've got a referee really. And of course the option there is removing your snakes and feeding them all separately if they cohab. But feeding in situ for many of these cohab species is perfectly doable. It's just that some of them you will need to keep an eye. These won't eat each other on purpose, but it doesn't do them any good. And this does happen when one gets a food item and the other one latches on to its face and the food item. And obviously superficial wounds can still become dangerously infected wounds. You don't really want that to happen. But blue beauties together, they're out more, they're way calmer, and they look fantastic, especially when you've got the green and the blue morphs mixed together. Beautiful. Highly recommend. You just can't beat a Baron's Racer. These guys are so inquisitive. They're just such amiable, brilliant snakes to keep. Mine certainly are anyway. Really friendly. Always together. Always together when they're chilling out. Intertwined like most cohab snakes. No problems at all. I just put food in. They sort it out. But again, during the summer high feeding season, they can be ravenous. Sometimes best to referee, but never had a problem with these guys being together. The only problem I've had with these is when I've kept a smaller individual, in the frenzied feeding behaviour, they tend to sort of often get out of the way and feel a bit nervous. So, as I've said before, cohabbing works much better for most species if you keep them similar size. Brazilian rainbow boas, I have a pair of these. I've had them since they were hatchlings, or rather newborns. I've kept these together. I've kept these apart, and currently they're well grown on now. One is more greedy than the other, and I did split them up for a while. Make sure the younger one was getting its fair share, because these things, if you feed multiple food items, when they're greedy, they just keep on gobbling them all up. Back together now, trial them back together. Absolutely fine, but we'll keep an eye, because one of them is still way greedier than the other one. And it can certainly be that by the time one's woke up and ventured out for the evening, the fatty has gobbled up all the food, even when it's multiple scattered offerings. But Brazilian rainbow boas, I've had no problem at all in anything other than one's greedy and one can go without the food. So black-headed pythons, now separated again. The breeding season's over. Let's see if she swells gravid. She's fat now, she's had a good feed. But these guys, once the temperatures at night are brought back up, because these are chilled at night, they tend to go off their food, but it triggers the breeding season. The nighttime temperatures are now warm. Ravenous feeders. And only a few days ago, once I started warming them, the reason I decided to split them back up is because they both had a rat. They both sniffed around their rat, somehow found each other, and then decided their scent on each other. One of the black-headed pythons, these are big 8-foot animals, they're the same sort of size. The male had nailed a female on the side, and of course he was going by scent, and he was hanging on in there. These things have got the most pathetic little heads. My God, they've got a strong old grip. So, sensibility is, I don't want any hassle like that. Let's split back up for now. It's all about knowing your individual snakes, knowing your snakes, knowing their behaviour, watching them very, very closely. Certainly, if it's a species that eats other reptiles. Russian rat snake going into shed. This one's twice the girth of its mate. These have been kept together and separate throughout their lives. They're currently separated because this one is a phenomenal pig. The other one's more picky. This one eats anything, the other one prefers mice. And in the interest of him getting his fair share and catching up, being more secretive, they're now separate again, but they'll go, as they get bigger, into a larger enclosure. More than likely, 99%, cohabit. Okay, so here's something people might think's odd to cohabit. Prevalent milk snakes, well known for eating other snakes in the wild. After all, they are a king snake. I've kept an adult trio of these together for ages. I no longer do, because I keep this girl here at Raptor Exotics for school education. That was her original job 15 years ago, bless her. And when she lays a clutch of eggs, she loses a lot of body mass. So I can't stop her laying eggs, but generally if you don't breed from them, you don't cycle them, and far less likely to lay eggs. Because of that now, she's retired from breeding, so she can keep at a reasonable girth without going through that trauma of losing too much body mass. And now I keep the female apricot prevalent and the male separated, and they're introduced for breeding. And of course, that's another thing, isn't it? Most breeders cohabit their snakes for some time, equally running the risk of things like eating each other and so on and so forth. Many of these species will live together all year round with nothing more than seemingly, I bit my tongue then, seemingly, I'm not going to say they enjoy each other's company, but thriving in each other's company and exhibiting behaviour and more actual behaviour than really they do when they're just left on their own. Prevalent milk snakes, by the way. Check out the website. Usually got these summer onwards because I love them, and when you breed these and hatch them, oh, it's a delight. All the different patterns and colours. Other things, my European ladder snakes and 4 lion snakes, I have and haven't cohabit, have no problems at all. And again, often the reason I'll stop is because if I'm scatter feeding, and that's a neat trick. If you feed mice and chicks rather than one big rat each or something, you can scatter feed and know that they're all getting something. Asclepian snakes, no problem at all. I drop a pile of food in, small food items, and they come out at night and eat them. No sign of those guys. Asclepian snakes, no problem at all. Grass snakes seem to thrive in each other's company, spend a lot of time together. Garter snakes, I've cohabit and bred those over, multiple times, no problem at all. Again, garter snakes, they can swallow each other due to size and greediness, not because they're snake eaters. And I have before retrieved a male garter snake, unbelievably, that far head first down a female's throat. How they can survive and still breathe, and well, not breathe, but hold their breath that long for you to rescue them is insane. But of course, if he wasn't there, yeah, she'd have ate him by accident. He's eating fish. Again, a smorgasbord on a plate, chopped up fish, chopped up things like mice, pinkies, chick legs, all together, and I let them feed, and they run off with the food and eat it. But if you're not refereeing, this is when things can really go wrong, cohabiting snakes. It's during feeding. You could get injury, you could get eaten. So you as a keeper has to think of ways around that if you want to cohabit them to keep them safe. Other snakes I just don't bother. Grass snakes, smorgasbord of food, scented rat pups, bits of trout and stuff like that. I've never had a problem at all. Viperine snakes, another natrix species from Europe. I've got youngsters. I've never kept them as adults. I've got youngsters now, 2 years old. 5 of those, always been together. absolutely zero problem. Cohabiting snakes really is interesting. It holds a new aspect to keeping snakes, and I think let's go for positivity. Positives of keeping snakes cohabbed is definitely behaviour you won't see, often much calmer snakes that you'll see a lot more of, and a better display. You might see your snakes more than you actually would, for sure. And something else that I tried for positivity this breeding season, if you like, people were less interested in snakes in 2022 because everyone was worried about electricity prices. And I thought that's the year to sort of try some experimentation, try some new stuff, try stuff that maybe other people haven't tried. So my garter snakes and grass snakes, I can tell you now, they thrive and are better and are calmer in a group. They actually are. On their own, very nervous little snakes, as most baby snakes are. Everything eats them. So I thought, what about my false water cobblers? Some years, some of them are really picky, quite nervous and poor feeders to get going. And I think it's because they're shy. This year, kept them all together in clutches of whatever, 20 at a time. Completely different snakes. And my reasoning was, let's see if they behave like water snakes, such as grass snakes and you know, garter snakes. Absolutely. Periscoping, all the time looking around, all the time interested, not hiding away, out safety numbers, much greedier feeders. I lost one got eaten by a sibling, and it was a runty one that got eaten by one that had got a lot bigger faster because it was the greedy one. And the answer to that is, as your clutches are growing, start separating out the really greedy ones. They're the ones to move on and sell first, aren't they? The ones that are just greedy, brilliant feeders. And then you're going to get another one behind that that's maybe the greedier. Separate that out. But keeping cohabbing baby snakes actually worked really well. I tried it with milk snakes. Yeah, I got a couple got eaten, so I think they are a little bit more cannibalistic than maybe the false water cobblers actually were. But again, it's down to feeding, plenty of food. But it is, I think, if you get the big ones that grow quicker, get them out and separate them. Milk snakes are nocturnal, so they're going to hide in the substrate anyway. But those false water cobblers, like garter snakes and grass snakes, my reasoning was those diurnal snakes that were shy, would they behave different in a group? I can guarantee you 100% they absolutely did. I'm going to do more cohabiting of small snakes this coming breeding season and see how they go again. So why wouldn't you cohab your snakes? Well, cross species and species from other parts of the world kept together across the species is, yeah, you're going to have different habitat requirements. Possibly. I think that's a loose argument because you could have, a lot of my snakes have very similar temperature and humidity requirements, and they could be from all different parts of the world. A rainforest in Mexico that's humid and 32 degrees C in the day is probably very similar to a rainforest in Thailand that's really humid and 32 C in the day. The forest floor probably very similar, and so on and so forth. It's a loose argument, but yes, snakes from different areas and different climates and that kind of thing. I think personally, a bit purist, but keeping them in set species is definitely going to work better. I have kept snakes, as I've told you before, different species together, no problem. You could get crossbreeding if you've got different species of colubris together. A lot of people love their hybrid snakes. I breed one lot of hybrids here. Hybrid animals, I've got different things I like about them, and I keep hybrid birds of prey and hybrid snakes. I don't particularly like them, but I understand very much why people do love hybridizing snakes. But of course, if you don't want to hybrid them, you don't want them to breed. So that's the reason not to. Biggest reason not to keep your snakes cohabbed. Biggest reason, you've got too many snakes and you haven't got enough room for them. That's not an excuse to cohab your snakes. And that's probably not going to be cohabbed well. And there's probably going to be, you are probably going to run into problems more than someone setting out to do it out of interest and experimentation under positive reasons. Why else wouldn't you cohab snakes? For sure, sex pests. Honestly, in the breeding season, some male snakes just will badger the females. Of course, in the wild, they can get away from the males, but in an enclosed space, that's not going to happen. Equally, dominance. Dominance to the point of aggression or just subduing down an individual. No one wants to live in fear and be bullied. That's a fact, isn't it? And snakes are the same. I think most animals are the same. You don't want an animal that's suffering because it's so submissive or subdominant. I was watching something recently on Reach Out Reptiles, and he was talking to an old timer like me. He was actually older than me, about his time when he gave away a giant, the guy he was talking to, he gave away a giant reticulated python to a zoo, big male, and they put it in with their other sort of, in the olden days, in with all the other male retics that have been sort of offloaded to the zoo. Wouldn't happen now. And it basically killed something like 6 fully grown male retics overnight. It was a super dominant male, and it just shredded them. You don't really want that. You don't want that aggression. But equally, my blue beauty snakes, in the spring, they'll dance the males, and they'll push and shove each other gently, and they'll intertwine, just like many male species of snakes do in the breeding season, sorting out who's the strongest, who's the most dominant, who's going to get the girls. Maybe they're showing off to the girls so she can pick the winner. They'll do that in captivity, and that will usually dissipate really quickly after the spring breeding season, let's say. And it's just mock battle, very different to biting and attacking. Again, another reason not to keep them. If you keep some of the crebos, some of the indigos, the males are well known for shredding and biting on the necks of the females. That's very different. You don't want that. You might get it in the breeding season. You don't want that as an ongoing thing, because you're cohabiting them and you're going to say, that's it, tough luck. You don't want that. My crebos, my yellowtails, there's no aggression or biting from the male whatsoever. So another reason not to keep them is definitely physical aggression. Another reason not to keep them is you're not watching around feeding, you're forcing them to cohab, and one just isn't getting its quota of food. Not a good reason at all. And as we've already talked about, being damaged or bitten or possibly eaten because you're not bothering to work out, understand, research, experiment, be there, look after, referee at feeding time. You've got to do your bit if you're cohabiting. It's different to keeping them on their own. And of course, not just accidental biting at feeding time. You don't want something as rare and as beautiful to behold as your black-headed python being eaten by its cage mate. Modify, change, experiment, intervene, interact. When you're cohabiting snakes, it's not a one-size-fits-all, put them together because that's what I want to do. Understand your snakes, listen to your snakes if that makes sense. Read their body language, read the situations. It adds a whole new dimension to keeping reptiles if you've only ever kept them on their own. But it takes a lot more work, time and effort and common sense, and not everybody has any of those things. There's lots more positives and negatives we can talk about when it comes to cohabiting snakes. Comment below what you think, especially if you're not just thinking or having an opinion on what you think. Tell me your opinion on what you've done, what you've experienced. It's one of those topics that it really does get the juices flowing on any online forum, any Facebook page. Have a think, but also let me know what has happened. Have you lost snakes? Have you found it's really, really interesting like I do? Do you just think, oh no, because that's it, it's a no, but you haven't actually tried it? Something to think about. It is another aspect, as I've already said, to keeping these reptiles, but it does take more work and thought. It's certainly not a case of I cohab my snakes because I just want to lump them together. I get great enjoyment out of watching these snakes interact. Oh, don't know what's going on out there. And when I build my outdoor enclosures for British and European species this year, they're all going to have multiple snakes in them of the same species, most of which are already kept together in indoor vivaria. And I know it's going to be way more fascinating and way more natural to have them in there together in a big outdoor enclosure than just one in there. Remember, where I come from, I find loads of snakes together throughout the year in different settings in the wild. Hit that subscribe for me, like, comment if it's in here, put it down, let me know. I reply to all the comments that I see, So feel free, but subscribe if you can. It will help the channel out no end. It's getting better and better gradually. I really want to keep doing this on the mobile phone. I just want to keep it real, but I'm well aware, especially some of this indoor stuff. Yeah, a camera's going to make some of it just such better quality footage that I think for some of these reptiles close up, as well as the falcon videos, I think I've accepted I'm going to have to go down that road eventually. Not yet, but maybe sooner than I hoped. Enjoy. See you in the next one.